I clicked through a few more static photographs that followed. A snapshot of the dense, fluffy white cloud layer beneath the wing, a close-up of a seatbelt buckle, a bored, angled picture of the safety laminated card, and an in-flight magazine tucked into the seat back pocket. With every press of the right arrow button, I prayed silently that I would reach the end of the memory card, that the screen would display no more files, but the digital counter in the top corner indicated there were still several clips remaining. And God help me, I couldn't look away. I was trapped in the loop of their final hours. I pressed play on the next video file. The girls' parents were both dozing now, their heads resting against their inflatable neck pillows. The camera panned slowly down the length of the main cabin, showing dozens of rows of seatbacks, sleeping passengers, and the blonde flight attendant slowly pushing the heavy metal beverage cart down the aisle from the front. She paused at row 28, leaned over to the girl, and reached into the chilled lower compartment of the cart, pulling out a small cardboard carton of chocolate milk. "Here you go, little explorer. Just for you," she whispered warmly. The camera zoomed in clumsily on the brown carton as the girl accepted it. Thank you so much." Then, the girl tilted the camera lens back up toward the woman's face to capture her smile. And that's when I saw it. On the high-resolution digital playback, a thin, unmistakable stream of dark, crimson blood was creeping slowly from the flight attendant's left nostril, trailing down over her lip and pooling at the corner of her mouth. She didn't seem to feel it at all. Her expression remained frozen in that polite customer service smile. "Ma'am, your nose is bleeding," the girl pointed out, her voice laced with innocent confusion. The flight attendant blinked, her brow furrowing as if she didn't understand the words. Slowly, she raised her right hand and touched her fingertips to her upper lip. When she pulled her hand back, her skin was smeared with thick, dark blood. For a split second, her professional mask slipped entirely, and an expression of pure, unadulterated terror flashed across her face. Without saying a word, she grabbed a handful of beverage napkins from the top of the cart, clamped them tightly against her face, and abandoned the cart in the middle of the aisle, turning and walking rapidly toward the forward galley at a near sprint. "What the hell is happening?" I whispered aloud to the empty sorting aisle, my thumb rewinding the clip to watch those final 4 seconds again. The blood wasn't bright red like a normal dry air nosebleed. It was viscous, dark, and seemed to carry a strange, greenish tint under the cabin fluorescent lights. And that look in her eyes, it wasn't just fear of a medical emergency. It was the look of someone who knew that something deeply catastrophic had just begun. Before I could process the image, a soft foam football bounced off my shoulder and landed on the metal sorting table. "Blue. 42. Hut hut," Brian yelled from across the conveyor belt. He was crouching over a massive canvas duffel bag overflowing with donated sporting goods, grinning like a fool. He cocked his arm to throw a second foam ball at my head, but I slammed my hand down on the metal table so hard the sound echoed off the high rafters. "Not now, Brian. I'm not in the mood," I snapped, my voice cracking with an intensity that genuinely startled him. He slowly lowered his arm, his smile vanishing as he looked from my pale face down to the pink rubber camera in my grip. "All right, man, chill out. You're still messing around with that kid's toy." "Yeah," I said curtly, keeping my eyes glued to the table. "Did you figure out who it belongs to yet?" he asked, stepping a few paces closer. I hesitated, my thumb resting over the power switch. "Maybe. I'm still logging the metadata." Brian gave a slight, uncomfortable shrug. "Well, looking at how trashed that suitcase is, I hope they aren't expecting the bag back in one piece." He turned and walked away toward the electronic sorting bins, leaving me standing alone in the cold glow of the overhead lights. As soon as his footsteps faded around the corner, my trembling thumb pressed play on the final, longest video file on the memory card. I wished to God I had just turned the device off, wiped the memory, and tossed it into the industrial incinerator bin. The camera bobbled wildly as the little girl unbuckled her seatbelt, climbed carefully over her sleeping father's knees, and lowered her sneakers onto the carpeted aisle floor. Up ahead, at the very front of the aircraft, the blonde flight attendant had vanished into the forward galley, pulling the heavy, navy blue privacy curtain completely shut behind her to block the view from the passengers. The girl paused in the aisle for several seconds, the camera shaking slightly as she likely debated whether to go back to her seat or check on the nice lady who gave her the chocolate milk. Curiosity won out. She began creeping slowly down the long aisle toward the forward cabin. All around her, the plane was peaceful and serene. Passengers were reading paperbacks, staring at laptops, or sleeping under blue blankets, completely oblivious to anything out of the ordinary. The only odd detail was that beneath the hem of the navy blue curtain, the flight attendant's black uniform heels were visible on the galley floor. They were standing perfectly still, planted shoulder-width apart, not shifting an inch. The girl took another cautious step forward. Then another. Boom! The camera jumped in the girl's hands as the public address chime rang through the cabin speakers. The captain's calm, authoritative voice crackled smoothly over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen from the flight deck, if you look out the left side of the aircraft right now, you'll get a crystal-clear view of the Cumberland River winding its way through downtown Nashville as we begin our initial routing toward the Florida border. A few passengers leaned toward their windows, but our little videographer just kept moving forward. Her lens locked stubbornly on those stationary black shoes beneath the fabric. She was only 10 steps away from the curtain now. A tall man in row 4 stood up suddenly to stretch and retrieve a sweater from the overhead bin, forcing the girl to press her back against the seats and squeeze sideways to pass him. When she cleared the man and refocused her camera toward the front of the cabin, the black shoes were gone. The space beneath the curtain was entirely empty. 5 steps now. The only sound on the recording was the steady rhythmic drone of the twin jet engines outside and the girl's soft, quickening breathing through the camera microphone. 3 steps. The girl's small, pale hand reached out into the frame, her fingers grasping the thick edge of the navy blue curtain. Ever so slowly, she pulled the fabric aside to peer into the forward workspace. The galley area directly behind the curtain was completely empty. The jump seat was folded neatly against the wall, the metal service carts were latched securely into their storage bays, and the accordion door to the cockpit was tightly closed. The camera panned left, then right, floating in confusion as the girl searched for any sign of the woman. She took 2 steps inside the galley. Then her camera tilted downward toward the linoleum floor tiles, and froze. Pulled right in the center of the galley floor, directly beneath the overhead air vent, was a thick dark puddle of fluid. Even through the grainy digital screen, I could tell it wasn't water or coffee. It was dense and dark crimson, spreading outward across the gray flooring. And then a single heavy drop of dark fluid fell from above, splashing directly into the center of the puddle with a sickening plop. Drip. Another drop hit the floor. Drip drip. The camera lens jerked upward, pulling back as the girl instinctively searched for the source of the falling fluid. Was it leaking from the storage lockers? No. Was it coming from the coffee makers? No. With a shared suffocating dread that made my lungs feel like they had been filled with concrete, I watched as the little girl slowly tilted the camera lens straight up toward the curved ceiling of the aircraft galley. The flight attendant was up there. She was pressed flat against the curved, molded plastic hull of the ceiling, her limbs splayed outward at unnatural, impossible angles, clinging to the smooth panels like a hunting spider. Her uniform was torn across the shoulders, and her head was twisted completely away from the camera, staring toward the cockpit door. For 2 agonizing seconds, neither the woman on the ceiling nor the terrified child on the floor moved a single millimeter. Then, with a slow mechanical jerkiness that defied human anatomy, the flight attendant's head began to rotate on her neck, turning 180 degrees to look down at the floor. Her eyes were gone. Where the whites and blue irises had been just 10 minutes ago, there were now only solid, abyssal black pits, weeping dark, oily tears that stained her cheeks. And when those dead, black voids locked onto the camera lens, I felt a paralyzing jolt of electricity shoot through my chest. I swear to Almighty God, across 3 years and a digital screen, she was looking directly at me. A thick stream of dark blood spilled from between her parted teeth. Drip. The world on the video exploded into absolute pandemonium. The little girl let out a shrill, breathless shriek as the camera whipped around wildly, the lens capturing a terrifying blur of motion as she turned and sprinted blindly back down the main aisle toward her parents. Then came the sound, an unnatural ear-splitting screech captured by the toy microphone that sounded like a colliding freight train mixed with the screaming of a wounded animal, echoing through the pressurized hull. The overhead fluorescent cabin lights instantly began to strobe and flicker violently, plunging the aisle into chaotic darkness and blinding white light. Bong bong bong, the flight deck intercom chimed in rapid, frantic succession, and the captain's voice crackled through the speakers, no longer calm, but shouting in raw, unfiltered panic. Mayday. Mayday. Flight deck breach. We have a before his voice was completely swallowed by a blast of deafening static and the sound of shattering glass. The entire cabin lurched violently to the left, the horizon out the windows tilting at a terrifying, unnatural angle as the aircraft was thrown into a sudden steep dive. The camera was knocked from the girl's hands, hitting the carpeted floor and skidding sideways beneath an aisle seat, its lens pointing upward at a 45-degree angle. Through this tilted, chaotic frame, I watched the nightmare unfold. Yellow oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling compartments, dangling and swinging like pendulums in the strobing light. Overhead bins burst open under the negative G-forces, raining heavy carry-on bags, laptops, and coats down onto the screaming passengers. And then, darting across the top of the seatbacks with terrifying, fluid speed, the pale, contorted form of the flight attendant scuttled down the length of the cabin on all fours, leaping from headrest to headrest toward the rear of the plane as passengers beneath her screamed and scrambled in the aisles. The audio track was a deafening wall of human terror, engine roar, and tearing metal. The camera was kicked by a fleeing passenger, spinning across the carpet until it came to rest jammed against the wheel of a seafoam green roller bag, the exact same bag sitting on my metal work table. A split second later, a massive explosive decompression roar shook the microphone as a cabin window gave way. The air filled with swirling white vapor and debris, and the video recording abruptly cut to black. I stood completely paralyzed at my workstation, the silence of the Alabama warehouse ringing in my ears like a physical siren. All around me the conveyor belts continued to hum, industrial fans oscillated slowly, and my coworkers casually tossed cardboard boxes into bins, completely detached from the absolute horror I had just witnessed. My chest was heaving, my shirt soaked through with cold sweat, and my hands were trembling so violently I nearly dropped the camera onto the concrete floor. Without saying a word to Brian or anyone else, I carefully powered the device down, slid it deep into the front pocket of my denim work jeans, and walked straight toward the exit. I found Shelley near the loading dock clipboard and told her I was getting a blinding ocular migraine, which wasn't entirely a lie as a sharp throbbing pain was hammering behind my right eye. I clocked out 3 hours early, stumbled out into the blinding afternoon heat, and drove my pickup truck straight to Scooters, a dingy dive bar on the edge of town. After my 5th double bourbon, my hands finally stopped shaking enough to hold my phone, but my mind was fractured. Carrie, the afternoon bartender who knew my family, took my car keys and drove me home around dusk. I collapsed onto my living room sofa in my work clothes and fell into a heavy, feverish sleep with the television blaring infomercials in the background. When my alarm went off at dawn the next morning, the sunlight streaming through my blinds felt harsh and disorienting. As I sat on the edge of my mattress, rubbing the stale sleep from my eyes, my logical brain immediately went to work building defenses. It was a dream, I told myself, pouring a cup of black coffee in my kitchen. Or it was a viral marketing stunt, some elaborate high-budget horror film promo that got loaded onto a used camera and donated to the store. The idea that an airliner had been taken down over the Cumberland River by some supernatural entity, and that the evidence had casually rolled into Bay 4 of the Unclaimed Baggage Center, felt completely impossible in the sobering cold light of a Wednesday morning. But as I reached for my denim jeans draped over the chair, my fingers brushed the solid, heavy lump of the rubberized camera in the pocket. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't dreamed the camera. It was real. I decided right then and there. I wasn't crazy, but I needed validation. I was going to take the device to work, plug it into the computer monitor in the inventory office, and show the video to Shelley and the security director. We would turn it over to the state police together.